In this video, we'll cover how to do what I call the pixel stitch. I first came across something like this on Pinterest and then modified it slightly to get what you see here. And I'll link that original Pinterest video down below, but this is slightly different than it. This is great for crochet tapestries, stuff like that, because you get all these little pixels, which is something you don't get when you're working a tapestry with normal single crochet. So if you compare these two, you can see that this one is definitely a larger stitch, but the biggest difference is in this checkerboard up here. You can see that the pixel stitch actually retains that checkerboard, whereas working it with single crochet doesn't. It's also great when you're working like smaller emblems. So these are both like 10 by 10 grids, if I'm remembering correctly. And you can see the dinosaur on the pixel stitch grid is a bit clearer than the one with the single crochet grid. Now, I love a single crochet tapestry. I love the texture it adds, but sometimes this might be the stitch you want to use instead, especially for smaller stuff or stuff where you really want clarity. The trickiest part about this stitch is the fact that you have to mirror it on any of your wrong side rows. So that's going to be basically anytime this side was facing me, or anytime your back side of your tapestry is facing you, you have to mirror that stitch. What this essentially is working the stitch with your non-dominant hand so that the fronts of your stitches are all facing the same side. If you've never done this before, I've done a video on how to mirror a single crochet if you want to get a little bit of practice with that before jumping into this stitch, which is just slightly more complicated. All right, so for this stitch, we're going to start with a starting chain. Now, I will suggest you probably want to up your hook size a little bit for your starting chain because you can see a little bit here that this is my starting chain. It's a little bit tight down here at the bottom. So going up a hook size or so should help to keep everything straight from the bottom up. We're going to want to chain the number of stitches we want plus 1. So if I'm going to do 15 stitches across, I'm going to chain 16. So I have 4 here. I'm going to go to 16. All right, so there's my starting chain. That's all 16 stitches done. Now, something to note about this stitch is it's worked into 2 stitches at a time, sort of like a decrease. So I'd be working into, say, these 2 stitches and then keeping that same stitch and going into these 2 and then these 2. So each stitch from the previous row is used in 2 stitches of the next row. And if that doesn't make a lot of sense, you'll see what I mean once we actually start working it. But the other thing is, since we're pairing up these stitches, if we were to just start here and say 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 for each stitch, we would end up with 1 fewer stitch in our rows than we wanted. So if this is, I think this one was 17 stitches across. If I were to just pair these up and not do anything special at the starts of my rows, I would end up with 16 stitches, and we don't want that. We want to keep the same number of stitches every time. So the way we get around that is the first stitch of all of our rows is worked around our starting chain or our turning chain. It's a little bit tricky right now because we don't have a turning chain, but you can imagine each, like these 15 stitches, these first 15 chains are the top of your row. This 16th chain is my turning chain. I'm going to work around it. So I'm actually going to go under my starting chain to pull up a loop. So it's a little bit tricky. And now it's really important to keep in mind where your second chain from your hook is. You can kind of see it here. So there's my loop. There's the chain it's in. And now I'm going to go into the second chain from my hook, this guy here. I have 3 loops on my hook. So I've pulled up 2 loops so far. I'm going to pull that second loop through the first one. And then I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2. And that's what the stitch is. So I'm going to go back into that first chain we worked into, pull up another loop, so that's the previous chain, pull up a loop, and then go into the next chain, pull up a loop, pull through 1, yarn over and pull through 2. Going into the previous chain that's been worked into, pulling up a loop, going into the next chain, pulling up a loop, going through 1, then going through 2. So you're always working into 2 stitches for this stitch. I will work a little bit and then I'll show you guys what it looks like when you're actually working into an existing row, because it'll be a little bit easier to understand, I think, rather than looking at what it looks like in a starting chain. So here's what it looks like if you're working this stitch into an existing row. It might be a little bit easier to understand than seeing it worked into a starting chain because these stitches are a lot more clear. So I've done my turning chain. I have my work facing me. You can think of it as, again, like we have like our 15 chains, our 16th as our turning chain. I'm going to be going around that turning chain to pull up a loop. Again, this is sort of like working into that previous stitch. And then I'm going to be going into the second chain for my hook, my first stitch, to pull up the second one. Pulling that loop through the first one on my hook, or the first one I pulled up, and then pulling through 2. And now I'm going to be working into that same stitch. This is what I've been calling the previous stitch, the one that's been worked into, and the next one. So going into that previous stitch to pull up a loop, going into the next one to pull up a loop, pulling that second loop through the first one, pulling through 2. And that's all there is to it. Working through 2 stitches at a time, always through the last one we worked in, and then the next one, just like that. If you're wanting to use this for a tapestry and you're wanting to do a color change, the way I do my color changes is the way that I would for like any tapestry, anything with single crochets, where I do everything but the last like yarn over and pull through with the single color. So if the next stitch were in my new color, I drop this yarn, get the new yarn on my hook, and pull through with that new color to make the next stitch. This method does leave a little bit of these like colors poking through. There might be a different color changing method that mitigates that even more, but I think it works pretty well, and any sort of peek through of the other colors is pretty minimal. All right, I'm getting to that last stitch here. I'm going to finish that out. And so that's how we work any of the stitches where the correct side of our work, the right side of our work, is facing us. So this is the side of the tapestry that you want facing outwards when you're done. Now we're going to be working the wrong side of our work. So if you don't do what I've been calling mirror crochet, you're not going to get those nice pixels. It's not going to be all clean. You have to mirror the stitch or else it doesn't work. So actually, before we go into the next row, there's something I really want to note that'll help us in mirroring. So I've gone back a few stitches. And if I were to work this, when I work this stitch, I'm going in through the front of my work, in through the right side of my work. I have the mouth of my hook facing me as I pull up a loop. I'm going in through the right side of my work. I have the mouth of my hook turning towards me, facing me as I pull up a loop. Now that's going to be really important because we want to reverse that when we go through and mirror these stitches, because we want it to look as if we're working with our opposite hand. So I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. I actually like to turn it so that the working yarn is on the back side of my work like this. So first loop, you can kind of just grab it however you want. This is kind of how I do it, is just grabbing like this. It's not super essential for this first one. It's a little bit tricky to actually turn your hook the right way. So I kind of just grab a loop, make sure there's one on my hook before actually starting the next stitch. Now, this is where we start mirroring. I'm going in through the back of my work. So the same first stitch, I'm just going in through the back. Now, the yarn is already over my hook holding it like this, but I want to turn my hook away from me so that the mouth of my hook is facing the front of my work as I pull that loop up. Then I'm pulling that loop through 1 on my hook, just that first one. You can see I'm turning the mouth of my hook towards me on that stitch because it's just pulling a loop through. I'm not actually pulling up a new loop. But this one, I am turning the mouth of my hook away from me again to get that last loop up. A little bit easier on the subsequent stitches, going in the previous stitch, mouth of my hook away from me to pull up a loop, going in through the back of my work on the next stitch, mouth of my hook facing away from me as I pull that loop up, pulling that second loop through the first one, and then one more time, yarn over my hook, mouth of my hook away from me, pulling it through that last set of 2 loops. So this is essentially crocheting with my non-dominant hand while keeping my hook in my dominant hand. You can learn to crochet with your non-dominant hand if you want to. Most of us probably don't, as I keep losing the yarn on my hook. That is something about this stitch, especially mirroring it, is it gets a little bit tricky. But this way, if you want to work the same stitch but just have the fronts of it all on the same side, you can do that. I find this method really useful when working and going between rounds and rows with like amigurumi, because they do have different textures between the front and back stitches. So I will mirror my single crochets if I'm switching between rows and rounds in order to get rid of that texture difference. And again, if you are struggling with this, you want a little bit of practice with an easier stitch, I have a tutorial for a mirrored single crochet as well. So if you want practice with an easier stitch, that is available. And then for color changing on this side as well, if you are making a tapestry, same thing goes where I will go do most of the stitch, so up to this point, and then drop my color, add the new color on, and continue. If I'm doing a tapestry or something, that's how I color change. Sort of same rules apply as normal. But yeah, that is what this stitch looks like. You can see even when worked in one color, you get those nice pixels, those really differentiated pixels of color. And you can also see now at this point what I'm talking about when I say you should size up your hook for your starting chain. You can see that it's kind of doing this a little bit. A few last things to note about this stitch are that number one, it is a little bit taller than it is wide. So it's not going to be perfectly square, but you are getting those pixels and it's pretty close. It's mostly square. You can probably modify your tension a little bit to get it more square if you want to. You can maybe be able to block it out a little bit to try and even things out, but it is just a little taller than it is wide. It's also fairly gappy. You can see here, you can see my table through this as I hold it up. Even more so here with the blue showing the tan behind it. So that's something to keep in mind. It's also like, it's fairly stiff, so it's probably not the best to use for clothing, but most crochet is stiff anyways, so this might actually turn out fine. But anyways, that is how you do this pixel stitch. I hope that was useful. If any of it was unclear, let me know and I'll try to clarify it best I can, but I hope that helps and I'll see you guys in the next one.